how to make my homemade caramel apple crumble pie. It is autumnal heaven in a dessert. Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel, where today I'm making one of my most favourite autumnal desserts I've ever written, which is my caramel apple crumble pie. It is just luxurious, it's delicious, and I adore it. And the main thing you have to start off with is we're going to make some homemade pastry. So if you don't want to make this bit, feel free to skip along because you can use shop-bought short crust pastry instead, but I thought I'd make my own because you know, you like to see homemade things, so we're gonna make some homemade pastry. But either way, it's super easy. The whole dessert is easy. Honestly, you know, you've got some stewed apples in there with a little bit of cinnamon, some caramel, crumble, pastry. What more could you want? It is perfection. So either way, let's get making my caramel apple crumble pie. So when you're making your homemade pastry, there are 5 ingredients you need, and this is the sweet one. So, you know, if you don't want the icing sugar, you can leave this out and it would just make it a 4-ingredient pastry. But I always start off my pastry with some plain flour. You don't want self-raising flour because that would result in a really weird crust to this pie. But we have plain flour. We have some cold and cubed unsalted butter. You don't want to use a spread for this, you want to use actual block butter because it makes it much, much better. And then we have a little bit of icing sugar, an egg yolk, and some cold water. And I'm gonna do the slightly cheats method today and do this in my food processor. But if you don't have a food processor, basically you need to bung all of the ingredients into a bowl and rub them together with your fingertips until it resembles sort of like a breadcrumby texture. Knead it together with the palms of your hand and then you'll have a delicious dough. But I thought I'd show you this method as well because it's in the original recipe. I thought I'd follow it. But basically we're gonna whack all of the ingredients in and pulse it until it forms a dough. So I'm gonna start by adding my plain flour to the bowl. Then I'm gonna add in my block unsalted butter. I'm gonna add in my icing sugar. I'm gonna add in my egg yolk. And then I'm gonna add in a splash of cold water. And then I'm just gonna pulse this until it breaks down and then combines. And there you have a deliciously easy short crust dough. So now you have your homemade pastry, and it really is that simple. And like I say, you can do it by hand, it just takes a little bit longer. But either way, this is the time when you have to prep your tin. So I'm using a 23cm loose bottomed tart tin. Like always, I use it in all of these sort of recipes. And the way I prep it is super, super simple, where I grab an oil spray and my plain flour. And I lightly spritz this, tip some flour in, and then turn it around to coat it. And basically, if any of that flour falls off, I just tip it onto the work surface because that is then what contributes to the flour you need to roll this out on the surface as well. So it's okay if it's a little bit messy. You can do it separately, of course, but I do it this way around just because I'm going to need the flour on the work surface anyway. So I might as well do it in this order. So I'm just going to lightly spritz it. And then I'm grabbing a little bit of plain flour and just sort of dusting it in. And then this is when you grab your tin and you move it about so that the plain flour then covers the surfaces, because this will help prevent the pastry sticking when it bakes. And as you can see, little bits are falling off, and that's totally okay because this flour on the base here is what we're going to use to roll out our pastry. So now we have a lightly floured surface. I'm just going to move that around ever so slightly, and then I'm going to place my pastry on this. This you want to roll out till it's about the thickness of a £1 coin, and then we can put it into our tin. I tend to roll little bits out like this, and then I'll move it on the work surface just to help make sure it's not sticking. So now I'm going to carefully lift this pastry into my tart case and just press it into the base and sides. If it rips a little bit, that's absolutely fine because you can just press it down with your fingers or the base of your hand. You want to make sure that the pastry is pressed into the sides and the base firmly. Once you've pressed it in, we're just going to chill the pastry in the tin for about half an hour. So now that my pastry is chilled and my oven is preheated, I'm just creating a bit of parchment paper to basically line this so that we can blind bake it. So I tend to do this by getting a square of parchment, and you just keep on folding it until you can basically create a triangle. This is just the easiest way to create a rough circle in lining a pastry case. It doesn't have to be perfect, it doesn't have to be exact. But as you can see, I just kept on folding it. It's a bit more like, I don't know, like a paper aeroplane at the minute. But I roughly hold it up to the pastry case, see roughly where the middle is, and then just trim the paper down. Once you've done this, you can basically press it into your pastry and then place some baking beans inside it. So these are just some cheap baking beans that I've got, and they're basically ceramic, and it helps basically make sure that the heat gets to the pastry without the pastry rising as it bakes. So blind baking for me is I bake at 180 fan for about 15 minutes, remove the beans and the parchment, and then bake for a further 5 minutes without, and it creates the perfect blind baked pastry case. And it's quite important to do this bit so that you don't basically get a soggy bottom, which nobody wants. But either way, it's really, really easy. If you don't have any baking beans, you can use uncooked rice. And make sure you put the parchment paper in, because the worst bit in the world is when you see people put the baking beans or rice in, and it's basically just going to bake straight into their pastry. So make sure you line it, and then you can just pour these in like so. And now your pastry is ready to bake. So 15 minutes with the parchment and the baking beans, carefully remove them, and then you can have 5 minutes without, and you'll create the perfect pastry case for your caramel apple crumble pie. So now my pastry has done the blind baking. You can see it's slightly brown on the edges, but it's perfectly cooked pastry in the middle. And I've basically let it come out of the oven. I'm gonna sort of prep this in different stages, this dessert, because I don't need it today. So I'm just gonna do this bit for now. But whilst the pastry is still slightly warm, I then get a sharp knife, and this is when I then trim my pastry. If you want, and some videos will do this, you can trim the pastry before you bake. I generally find it a little bit easier to make sure it overlaps ever so slightly, because then when I trim it down, the edges will be perfect. If you trim it before, the edges might shrink away slightly, and then the pastry case is going to be smaller than you want it to be. But it's up to you which way around you do it. I'm going to do it now and basically just lightly get my knife, and I'm just going to sort of brush it along until I reach the tin, and then take off the excess pastry, and then it's ready for the filling. So now I've trimmed my pastry case, I'm actually going to store this in the freezer for a couple of days, and then I'm going to bake the filling, because I'm just going to do it on a separate day. I want to make this dessert for a particular occasion. So either way, I've now prepped my pastry, I'm just going to freeze it, and then I will see you in another clip, probably wearing a different outfit, where we can make the rest of the pudding. And now we're back. So obviously in the first part of the video, different outfit, different day, but we were making the pastry case for the caramel apple crumble pie. So that is just chilling here, ready to go. So now we're gonna make the filling. And the filling, it's 2 different parts plus a bit of caramel. So I have the Bramley apples here, which are just cooking apples, which I'm gonna peel and chop. These then have to go in the pan for a few minutes just to simmer down and soften slightly, with some cinnamon, a little bit of water, and some brown sugar. And whilst that's like bubbling away, I'll also rub together the crumble mixtures just with my fingers in another bowl, and then we can easily assemble. Honestly, it's one of those things, chuck all of the apple mixture on top, drizzle on the caramel, sprinkle on your crumble, and then bake to have the most perfect autumnal delicious pudding ever. It is incredible. So yeah, I'm just gonna go and peel and chop the apples. Now I'm just going to add my light brown soft sugar, my cinnamon, and then a little bit of water as well. Now we're just going to turn this on and simmer for about 5 minutes with the lid on to allow the apples to soften. And whilst this is going, I'm going to rub together the crumble mixture as well. So I'm going to add my flour to the bowl, I'm going to add my caster sugar, and I'm going to add my cold and cubed unsalted butter. And then you're just going to rub these together until it resembles breadcrumbs with your fingertips. Once your apples have stewed for 5 minutes in the pan and you've made your crumble, we can now assemble. Now I'm just going to dollop over my caramel sauce. And then finally, you're going to sprinkle over the crumble mixture. So now my pie is assembled, I'm just gonna bake it in the oven at 180 fan for about 25 to 30 minutes until it's starting to golden and it's delicious. And then you're gonna take it out of the oven, leave it to cool for about 20 minutes, 30 minutes, just for it to settle in the tin. Then we can remove and enjoy the caramel apple crumble pie. So now my caramel apple crumble pie is out the oven. It's looking golden and delicious. So the last bit is just to take it out the tin onto your plate, and then obviously you can serve it up. I'm gonna do mine with a little bit of ice cream, a drizzle of caramel sauce because, but either way, I hope you love this recipe. It's one of those that is just so warming, delicious, and heavenly, like I've said. So make sure to check out the full recipe in the description box below. As always, I'll put a link to the blog post because all the information's there. I'll put the recipe ingredients below anyway. If you have any comments, let me know. And of course, give the video a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. And come back next time for something equally as delicious. And if you have any recipe requests, leave them below as well because I love to know what you guys want to see. But either way, I hope you love this recipe. Enjoy!